Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, August 26th, 2025. Time for another show. Time for another birthday. Scott Anderson, happy birthday. Me, well, I gotta wait a whole year again. This is the worst day of the whole year. I guess I would think that if I was about 5 years old. But hey, it's not so bad, and Scott's celebrating, I guess. I hope that doesn't mean you're not listening. Anyway, at any rate, plenty to catch up on as usual. Definitely a couple of longer pieces that are waiting in the wings, as everything was sort of a catch-all for the last couple of shows. It's been very chaotic. I don't know if you know about Donald Trump and his chaos agent thing, but that's kind of what's going on. Anyway, I think we've prepared you well in at least one respect. I got to open up some of these pages where I can bring you the news here, but I think we prepared you well for what I guess is probably top crisis or legal crisis news of the day, I suppose. We warned you last week that Trump was getting ready to put together a pretext for firing Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and today yesterday, he purports to have done that. Can he do it? No, he's not supposed to be able to do it. Is there a law against it? Yes. Does he think he can get around it? Sure. Will the Supreme Court help him? They shouldn't, because it would be massively hypocritical, but maybe they will. What's going on? Well, let's head right over to Instapaper, which will give us a link to not quite as Insta papers around the country. The New York Times, of course, is on the case and was last night. They have an interesting piece to share to give you background. But I don't know. I think we did a good job in bringing you the background to the background news, the news you're going to get now. Last week, explaining to you that the premise that they were going to use, and this is in fact the premise, to fire or to purport or to claim to be able to fire Lisa Cook was A, very thin, and B, probably made up, and C, even if there was a grain of truth to it, was such a common thing and I guess low-level offense, and really not even an offense. Generally speaking, the thing they're calling mortgage fraud is, I think, stems from, because we haven't really seen the evidence of this alleged fraud yet, let alone gotten to any point where anybody has actually become officially in trouble for it. You know, there's no conviction or anything, and there may never be a conviction because it's not even clear that it's any violation of the law that rises to that level. But the idea being the very commonplace, unfortunately, practice of, and sometimes the buyers don't even really participate necessarily in this so much as nod or look the other way or just say, I don't know, the mortgage guy was telling me this is okay. So he prepared the papers and I signed them and that's it, but claiming more than one primary residence. Although, as it turns out, sometimes the wording is, and I guess it's intentional, for situations like this, principal residence rather than primary residence. And people can have more than one principal residence if they split their time between more than one home. And while primary is pretty difficult to get around, principal is not. Anyway, you remember that was the situation, that they were saying, well, she's got a mortgage on more than one property, and there's a claim here that more than one of them is her primary/principal. Not sure which one. Residence. And how can that be? Well, there are any number of ways it could be, and there are any number of ways that you could end up with that on your paper without actually it being true. But usually what ends up happening is you make amends with your borrower or mortgage issuer or whoever it is, and some money changes hand and everything is fine. There's no criminal charges per se. By the way, it's so common that I think you would probably find that almost anybody who rises to any prominence has involved themselves in this so-called fraud. And certainly we know Ken Paxton has 3 times over, but they have nothing to say about that. And in all likelihood, Donald Trump did as well. I might add that. And I think somebody actually says that they have documented that in the past. Trump, I mean, he's an interesting case, of course, because of the number of properties he owns where he maintains a residence. And I mean, it goes doubly for Donald Trump. In addition to his moving back and forth, say, between Florida and New York and even New Jersey, where he maintains a residence at the golf club. But Mar-a-Lago, I mean, he fought for years in the decades after he bought the place with the local authorities about the use of it. And he had to sign some sort of document when he proposed turning it into a private club. It was a private residence at first, and he bought it as a private residence. And they were unhappy in rich person land down there about the idea of it being turned into a hoity-toity club with all these grubbers moving in and out. And anyway, he had to sign papers insisting that there would be no permanent residence of Mar-a-Lago, and he wasn't going to use it as a residence for more than a week at a time, and guests wouldn't be staying for more than a week at a time. And even if they did stay for a week or so, they wouldn't be doing so more than 3 times a year. There was a whole agreement that allowed for the zoning and land use of the property, and he just ignored that as soon as he was interested in living there full time, and everybody walked away from it essentially. This is another one of those things where he breaks those rules and people just say, what can you do? That's just Trump being Trump. Well, now, of course, he seeks to dismiss Lisa Cook for not exactly the same thing, but certainly a related issue. All right, so the New York Times writes it up this way. Trump, in a move with little precedent, none, says he is firing a Fed governor. And as I understand it, no one has ever fired a Fed governor. So, yeah, that is little precedent. 0 of it, as it happens. Okay, President Trump told Lisa Cook, and he didn't. He posted on Truth Social to no one in particular that he had gone ahead and done this. I think there was a letter, perhaps, that was generated along with it, and I think that has just been released. Maybe that's what they're talking about. President Trump told Lisa Cook that he had found sufficient cause, he hasn't, quote, to remove you from your position. Ms. Cook and her lawyer said they would fight the firing, and that's good news. We'll see how it goes. Let's see, Tony Rahm, Colby Smith, and Ben Castleman are the byliners on this New York Times piece from yesterday, I guess late evening yesterday. President Trump said on Monday, and that was yesterday, that he was taking the extraordinary step of removing Lisa Cook from the Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve in a legally dubious, maneuver that could undermine the independence of the nation's central bank. Mr. Trump justified the firing, which he said was effective immediately, by pointing to allegations, and that's it, that Ms. Cook may have, and that's it, falsified records to obtain favorable terms on a mortgage, which is how Trump ended up with 34 counts of fraud against him and his business, for which they were found liable in a trial immediately prior to his election, as you know. And so they'll, of course, be making the same charges as they're working on against Letitia James, who prosecuted him in that case. Anyway, for Ms. Cook and her lawyer, they vowed to fight her so-called dismissal, I would add so-called to that, maintaining that the president did not have grounds to oust her. Ms. Cook has not yet been charged with any wrongdoing or convicted of a crime. In the days before Mr. Trump attempted to remove her, the president made no secret about his desire to remake the roster of the Fed, as he savaged its members, including Jerome H. Powell, the chair, for keeping interest rates too high, in his opinion, I would have to say. By targeting Ms. Cook, Mr. Trump appeared to set the stage for a landmark battle that could define the limits of his power over the Fed. Many legal experts raised serious concerns late Monday with the manner of Ms. Cook's dismissal and the president's justification for doing so, as they warned that Mr. Trump's intervention could compromise an institution at the heart of the economy, if he cares about that, with damaging results, if he cares about that. In a letter posted to social media, and that's it, right? So he never sent it to her. He just wrote it up. They, scanned it and made a PDF or, JPEG and put it up on Truth Social. That's how they distribute these things. So in a letter posted on social media, Mr. Trump said the allegations of mortgage fraud undermined Ms. Cook, who was confirmed by the Senate in 2022, as, by the way, in case you were wondering why he chose Ms. Cook to go after, the first black woman to serve on the Fed's board. The president claimed she could not perform as an effective financial regulator, as he invoked a power in the Fed's founding statute that allows him to fire governors for cause. This is the claim here. In a statement released through her lawyer on Monday evening, Ms. Cook said that no cause exists under the law for Mr. Trump to fire her. I will not resign, she said. I will continue to carry out my duties to help the American economy as I have been doing since 2022. Ms. Cook's lawyer, Abby Lowell, very good lawyer, as you know, added, "We will take whatever actions are needed to prevent her firing." With Ms. Cook's dismissal, Mr. Trump could effectively stand to gain a majority soon at the Fed, one composed of members he has appointed to the posts, with Mr. Powell's term set to expire next year. Peter Conti Brown, a professor at, you'll never guess where, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, said it would spell the end of central bank independence as we know it if Mr. Trump were to prevail, adding the president will run riot over the Federal Reserve by using the formidable resources of the U.S. government against our own central bank. There's a link here that allows us to read the document, read the Trump directive, though it's disguised as a letter here, firing Lisa Cook. I'd be interested, I guess, in what the contents of the letter are, but we'll see whether it becomes necessary. The allegations against Ms. Cook came from Bill Pulte, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who has spent weeks fanning Mr. Trump's ire against the Fed over its approach to monetary policy. Mr. Pulte, for months, similarly drummed up accusations against Mr. Powell, accusing him of mismanaging a renovation at the Fed's headquarters, while privately at one point urging the president to fire him. Mr. Pulte specifically claimed that Ms. Cook had committed mortgage fraud, alleging that she improperly designated both a condominium in Atlanta, and a home in Ann Arbor, Michigan as her primary residence when taking out loans. In doing so, Mr. Pulte said Ms. Cook had falsified bank documents and property records in a way that allowed her to obtain a lower interest rate. Of course, I remind you, and if you haven't heard our previous week's show, Bill Pulte, scion of a home builder empire, Pulte Homes, who was in charge of Pulte Capital Partners, which I guess is the financing arm of Pulte, and may or may not, I'm not certain whether it's the, whether it does financing of just large scale projects or it's whether it's the individual homeowner consumer finance division of Pulte that will write initial mortgages to home buyers in order to facilitate sales of Pulte constructed homes. But it's the mortgage originators who tend to be at the heart of this stuff. And I maintain that they probably have a wink and nod policy with one another and with the higher ups, and at the urging of the Pulte family, who ultimately benefits from all of this, probably closes a lot of deals by falsely marking loan origination papers with primary or what did we say? Primary or principal residence when originating a loan, so that they can get people to sign in a dotted line. They can say, look, nobody looks at these papers, nobody cares. The only the only potential injury, and this of course is a lie because there's there's a wider potential for injury, and you'll see how, and I guess in just a second. But if they tell people, listen, there's nobody's going to look at this, just go ahead and check the thing. Everybody's doing it. You'll get a lower tax rate. You might get a more favorable interest rate from the bank. Ordinarily, if you were going to a bank, and especially the case if Pulte is loaning you the money to buy one of their homes, and then they just later resell that loan to a bank or as part of a securitized group of mortgages that they put on the market, whatever. They don't hold the loan for very long usually, I wouldn't guess, Pulte financing. But they're the originator. And if they say, listen, the only people who care about whether or not this is true, that this is your primary residence, would be you as the taxpayer. You want to pay higher taxes on your property, you're welcome to do it. You want to pay higher interest rate on your property, you're welcome to do it. But if your lender knows and doesn't care and knows that nobody's going to be looking at these papers anyway, go ahead and sign it. And we're the lender, so we're okay here. You want to do it and you're party to this deal. We want to do it and we're party to this deal. Let's do it. Nobody's any the wiser and nobody gets hurt. Right? Does anybody get hurt? Well, the people that they securitize. If they securitize the mortgages and sell them on the market, or they just sell the individual loan to a bank, the bank, can do its due diligence and should be looking into it and saying, it says here that it's the primary residence. Is it? But, they're moving too fast and moving too many pieces of paper and making too many deals to really care about that. They take Pulte's word for it, and they take on the loan under the terms that Pulte originated, and they say, well, if it's good enough for Pulte, then it's good enough for us, and they take it. But they would have a claim, I guess, against Pulte if they could prove that they knowingly were falsifying these papers too. But it's just sort of part of the game, and they're buying hundreds and thousands of these mortgages at a time, so they just never look. They're right. Nobody looks at this stuff. But in the meantime, Pulte sells more homes and closes more deals more quickly and makes more money, and Bill Pulte becomes richer as part of the family when this practice goes on. The fact that I don't know if he invented the practice, but the fact that he engages in this practice or encourages others to engage in this practice on his behalf makes it easy to figure it out, right? So now he's the head of whatever the hell it is, Federal Housing Finance Agency, and says, well, one convenient way to nail almost anyone you want, anybody who's risen to enough prominence to become an annoyance for President Trump, chances are you'll find that they have more than one property, and almost certainly you'll find that if they bought that property anytime in the last 20 to 40 years, in all likelihood, they went ahead and they pulled this same trick that we used to indulge in and still do with all of our buyers. So it was an easy thing to think up. Anyway, so that's the reason why it's, to me, specifically of interest that Bill Pulte is so involved in making these accusations. Now, unveiling his findings over a week of social media posts and television interviews, Mr. Pulte referred the case to the Justice Department, which is also highly weaponized, which opened a criminal investigation at his request, and he urged Mr. Trump to fire Ms. Cook, which the president later said he would do if she did not depart on her own. By focusing on Ms. Cook's mortgages in particular, Mr. Pulte's tactics fit an emerging pattern of political retribution. Both he and Mr. Trump have trotted out similar allegations of fraud against the president's perceived enemies, including Senator Adam Schiff of California, no T in that, who, as a Democratic representative, led congressional inquiries into Mr. Trump during his first term. Congressional inquiries, by the way, impeachment manager, twice. I mean, go ahead and say it. And also Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, who won a civil fraud trial against Mr. Trump before he returned to office. What kind of fraud was it? Well, among other things, mortgage fraud. Go ahead and say that. By Monday, the president seized on the allegations to dismiss Ms. Cook, telling her in a letter posted to Truth Social that the accusations of mortgage fraud were sufficient to, quote, to remove you from your position. I mean, that is not true, but that's what he said. The allegations the accusations of mortgage fraud are really just that. So far, no one's seen any, for instance, paper on any of this, let alone proven that this was intentional. And there's some discussion out there about what would it take to even try to make a case out of something like this. But it doesn't matter to Mr. Guilty until proven innocent over there. And also, by the way, guilty even after being proven innocent. If you take into account things like, the Central Park Five, who we wanted executed even after there was DNA evidence proving that they could not possibly have been involved in the attack. Okay. Under the Federal Reserve Act, the law that charters the central bank, Mr. Trump may dismiss a governor only if he can demonstrate cause. And the thing is, no one knows what that means. But typically it's defined as professional neglect or malfeasance. And there's none of that going on. In recent days, legal experts have questioned whether the president could satisfy that burden, given the fact that the allegations against Ms. Cook have not been proved in court and involve personal matters. How very interesting. And by the way, there's no way you can exclude Trump from the ballot in the election based on the 14th Amendment because there's been, nothing proven in court, right? So that means something, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the 14th Amendment on its face, not relevant here, so let's leave it and just see whether or not he gets elected. Oh my gosh, he did. And now we'll throw out the rest of the Constitution while we're at it. But for Lisa Cook, nope. No benefit of the doubt there. It doesn't matter whether you've been even charged in court. Just, you're out. Well, she says she's not. Now, Mr. Trump has sought to make his case. The Federal Reserve has tremendous responsibility for setting interest rates and regulating reserve and member banks, he said in his letter. Someone else wrote, the American people must be able to have full confidence in the honesty of the members entrusted with setting policy and overseeing the Federal Reserve, but not the president, apparently. In light of your deceitful, maybe, and potentially criminal, maybe, in conduct in a financial matter, which hasn't been established in the least, they cannot and I do not have such confidence in your integrity. Lev Menand, a professor at Columbia Law School and former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, said Ms. Cook's dismissal appeared at first glance to be an illegal firing, since it did not appear that the president provided proper notice and allowed her an opportunity to be heard. I think that central bank independence was hanging by a thread before this, Mr. Menand said, adding that the risks stood only to grow. The Fed occupies a unique and defining role in the economy, assigned to monitor inflation and keep watch over the labor market. With Ms. Cook's departure, Mr. Trump could appoint a new loyalist in the critical board who shares his desire for a swift and dramatic reduction in interest rates, even though economists fear that a premature reduction could cause severe damage. By the way, I do want to point out that a number of people said to me when I pointed out last week the story that the president had bought some $100 million worth of corporate bonds the other day, and thinking, well, back in the 80s when his brain was frozen, that was said to be the way to hedge against an anticipated crash in the stock market. The stocks are going down the tubes, go to the bonds, and vice versa. Now, I don't know whether that was just too elementary or whether that's still the case, given the number of changes in the financial markets, etc. Somebody else who sounded, anyway, like they knew a little bit more about what they were doing when it came to finance like that, said, well, one of the things that you might do if you think that you can, if you think you're predicting a drop in interest rates, then these corporate bonds, which entitle the bearers to payoffs at a certain rate, if interest rates are going to plummet, then you would do well in selling those bonds to people who are interested in the income derived from it that would go, I don't know, somehow the drop in interest rates, if you've got a guarantee of being paid at a higher interest rate, you'll want those bonds. So he'll make a killing selling those bonds. So by the same token, if you know that interest rates are going to drop because you are going to fire everyone on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors until you can replace them with people who will vote to drop interest rates because they will do anything you say, if you can fix the market that way, and you're holding $100 million worth of bonds, the value of which will skyrocket as soon as rates drop, well, then that's something even more interesting. It's one thing when it's a guess or a bet, and even an educated guess. It's insider trading when it's something else, and of course, it's illegal market manipulation if you take it to the ultimate thing. But of course, you can't be charged with anything because you're also the president of the United States. Anyway, the illegal attempt to fire Lisa Cook is the latest example of a desperate president searching for a scapegoat to cover for his own failure to lower costs for Americans, says Senator Elizabeth Warren. It's an authoritarian power grab that blatantly violates the Federal Reserve Act and must be overturned in court. In her sole comments issued in a statement last week, Ms. Cook said that she had no intention of being bullied to step down from my position, but pledged to answer any legitimate questions and provide the facts. Her departure, nonetheless, would create a second vacancy for Mr. Trump to fill on the 7-member Federal Reserve Board after another governor, Adriana Kugler, resigned unexpectedly. And is anybody looking into that? Earlier in August, the president has nominated Stephen Mirren, currently the chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, to fulfill Ms. Kugler's term, which concludes in January. Both posts require Senate confirmation. Okay, so we're facing a Senate contest on that one. Anyway, I haven't really heard much more in terms of by way of explanation for Adriana Kugler's departure, just that she did and that it was unexpected. And I wonder whether they decided to afford her the courtesy of saying we're about to charge you with mortgage fraud or some other thing or what. I am not sure. Anyway, someone might look into that, and we might have an exciting story one day about this. All right, I want to return to another angle on this very important story after this brief break, and that's what we're going to do, by God. Hi, everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I've gotten through the New York Times initial piece about this. However, there's more, and one of the things I thought it might be worth sharing with you. Well, first of all, the Blue Sky post that I am about to open up. Oh, very exciting. Pressing buttons, etc., etc. Alyssa Katz is the author of the post, executive director of The City, New York. And I don't know, is that the paper that received the potato chip bag the other day? Is Alyssa Katz indeed the reporter that received the potato chip bag? I don't know how many reporters they've got there, but and I don't know whether The City is on Blue Sky as The City NY, but I mean, certainly stands to reason. Executive editor there, so not the beat reporter who would have been handed the potato chips, but certainly someone enjoying the potato chips story over the past couple of days. Alyssa Katz, though, more to this point, has this to say on Blue Sky. I caught Trump taking a homeowner tax exemption on his Trump Tower suite while living in the White House. Where's that guy live, for real? Oh, well, I would say his principal residence at the moment, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., the White House, but still taking a homeowner tax exemption on his Trump Tower suite. He owns it, no doubt about that, but was he primarily residing there? Absolutely not. When he left the White House, he was primarily residing at Mar-a-Lago, or occasionally, what's the name of I can't remember the name of the town where he has the residence in New Jersey. But who cares? Except, the people who live there. Anyway, I caught Trump taking a homeowner tax exemption on his Trump Tower suite while living in the White House. If falsely claiming a residence for financial benefit is cause for dismissal, she says, and links us right to that story that we just read from the New York Times. More on the New York City tax break. Thankfully, she follows up with more posts. Reckon we've cost him a good $500,000 by now. Pointing here to, ironically, the pointer.org entry. The reporter who is making Trump pay $48,000 more in taxes. Interesting. Before I go there, there's another comment here from Alyssa that says, correcting a slight inaccuracy in the account. I sought and saw the deduction in the tax rolls, and my colleague confirmed it with the finance department. Teamwork. Okay, now I'm interested in seeing, well, how long is this read over at Pointer, and when's it from? This is July 6th, 2018, so right in the middle of his first term, and, I think it was probably obvious to anybody who knew anything about property loan origination that this was going to be the case somewhere in Trump's papers. The reporter who was making Trump pay $48,000 more in taxes. David Beard is the reporter who wrote this story about the reporter who was making Trump pay. And the reporter who's making Trump pay is Jillian Jorgensen. Jillian Jorgensen made a difference this week. Questions by Jorgensen. I don't know whether she goes by Jorgensen or Jorgensen. We'll have to ask her, and hopefully it'll cost us less than $48,000. The questions from Jorgensen, the City Hall bureau chief of the New York Daily News, prompted President Donald Trump to have to pay more taxes on his Trump Tower condo. Guess it worked. They also shed light on a ridiculous claim by Trump's camp that the occupant of the White House is actually spending more of this year in New York instead of Washington. On Thursday, New York's finance department rejected that claim, saying Trump was ineligible for a tax abatement based on residency for the 2018-2019 tax year. For Jorgensen, that's a good way of compromising on the pronunciation. Jorgensen, put a little heavy emphasis on that and make it sound almost J-like. For Jorgensen and the Daily News, the scoop is part of the unsexy gumshoe reporting and beat work that is the bread and butter of Metro News. A lot of journalism is not that exciting, like looking at property records or the city record, which we do every day, said Jorgensen, formerly of AM New York. The New York Observer, wasn't that Jared Kushner owned that for a while? And the Staten Island Advance, which is only 3% of what people read, as you know. Anyway, most of those city contracts are boring, but some of them aren't. Well, that's news, isn't it? Jorgensen said she actually thought she had the story in July of 2017. The tax year runs from July to June. But due to a quirk in the law, Trump's residence on January 5th, 2017, Trump was still in New York before his inauguration on January 20th, 2017, allowed him to keep the tax break for the 2017-18 year. She had forgotten about her work a year ago when on Tuesday, an editorial board member, Alyssa Katz, that's the one who posted on Blue Sky, reminded her that Trump probably wouldn't qualify this year. It was a slow week at City Hall, Jorgensen said, and we didn't want to wait. She immediately made the call to the city's finance department, which got back late Tuesday, saying it didn't have final word yet. After Wednesday's holiday, the department got back Thursday, rejecting the Trump claim. Jorgensen is still awaiting a call back from Trump's tax team, cautioning that it is unclear who on Trump's side decided to claim the abatement this year, or if it was an oversight. which of course I'm sure is an excuse he would avail himself of, but won't allow Lisa Cook to, I'm sure. Jorgensen posted her story late Thursday, and Katz followed with an unfriendly mini editorial. Headline, "Pay up, pal. Daily News catches Trump in a tax dodge," with Daily News-style turns of phrase like, "The cheapskate in chief who once deposited a check for 13 cents and claimed a $304 school tax credit granted to the unwealthy is at it again." Since then, Jorgensen has gotten a flood of comments on social media. Some have criticized her work, asking if she'd done the same for Obama. "I'm looking at that," Jorgensen replied, adding that an early determination showed he didn't claim residency at his Chicago address while president. Whoops. Oh well. Others were gleeful that Trump has to pay an additional $48,834.62. Jorgensen wants to make it clear she's not cheering from the press box. "I just look at the tax bills and ask the questions," she said. A sentiment that New York's Democratic mayor, Bill de Blasio, remember that guy? A frequent target of Jorgensen's inquiries, likely would second. Likewise, after work Thursday, she didn't celebrate that her reporting set back America's most powerful person. "It's not like that," Jorgensen said. "I try to think of it more like, I got today's story. What do I have to do tomorrow?" Well, okay. It's very neutral and view from nowhere, but satisfying nonetheless. Okay, that's an interesting angle on things. Now, I also thought we might benefit by reading from Paul Krugman on this, and it's not at the New York Times. He has, of course, since struck out on his own in Substack world, where people like Paul Krugman can make a good amount of money doing that. As for the rest of you that Substack doesn't pay to populate their site with content, well, you might think about moving. But it certainly is very easy to get set up there. Paul Krugman has done so, and he wrote something yesterday that I looked at and said, actually not that informative on this subject. But he's come back with a follow-up today. "In the matter of Lisa Cook" is the piece I'm thinking of, and it's from today, the 26th. "Trump's attempt to fire a Fed governor is illegal. Now we find out whether that matters." That's the subheader. Yesterday, Donald Trump said that he had fired Lisa Cook, a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. "My wording is advisable." He, quote, said that he had fired her. "I'm not a lawyer, but it seems clear that he does not have the right to summarily fire Fed officials, certainly on tissue-thin allegations of mortgage fraud before she even went to the Fed." Cook has said that she will not resign. So at this point, the immediate onus is on Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman. Why? I would ask you, and the answer is he has the right, and then Krugman says, I would say the obligation, to say, show me the legal basis for this action. If Trump's officials can't provide that basis, he, Jerome Powell, should declare that as far as he is concerned, Cook is still a Fed governor. If Powell caves, or the Supreme Court acts supine again and validates Trump's illegal declaration, more on that later, I think, the implications will be profound and disastrous. The United States will be well on its way to becoming Turkey, or Turkey, as we might say these days, where an authoritarian ruler imposed his crackpot economics on the central bank, sending inflation soaring to 80%. Yikes. And the damage will be felt far beyond the Fed. This will mark the destruction of professionalism and independent thinking throughout the federal government. So, about the legal authority. The Supreme Court, shamefully, has said that Trump has the authority to fire officials at will throughout the federal government, effectively eviscerating the principle of a professional civil service. But even the court specifically carved out protections for Fed governors. Do you remember this? Saying that they can only be removed for cause. Okay, so that's something. Now, normally, for cause means neglect of one's job or malfeasance on the job, yet even Trump's people have made no claims that Lisa Cook has failed to fulfill her duties at the Fed or done anything wrong in her role as governor. So what's the complaint about Cook? You know what it is, of course, but he puts it this way. Trump says that she committed mortgage fraud by taking out 2 mortgages, claiming both properties as her primary residence, back when she was a professor at Michigan State, before joining the Fed. Even if true, the accusation wouldn't meet the standard for immediate dismissal from the Fed. Furthermore, there's no reason to believe Trump's assertions that she committed fraud. So far, the Justice Department hasn't even made any formal charges, let alone won a conviction, and we have no clear evidence of wrongdoing. As far as I can tell, the only evidence seen by outsiders shows that she took out mortgages on 2 properties, and the security instrument associated with these mortgages say that both properties are, quote, principal residences. But as Adam Levitin at Credit Slips says, principal isn't the same as primary. Someone who has a home in the city and a second place in the country might well consider both principal residences. Furthermore, there's no evidence that Cook even knew what the security instrument said. She may have done nothing more than promise to make her mortgage payments. And a claim of mortgage fraud requires both that the borrower make a deliberate misrepresentation, as opposed to making a mistake on in a complicated process, and that this misrepresentation caused financial harm to the lender. We've seen no evidence at all for either proposition, and as I was discussing, speculating earlier, that if the loan originator is somebody like the financing arm of Pulte Home Builders, they'll just say, oh, well, if it gets brought to court and they're implicated and they can't just push all the responsibility off to the homeowner for whatever reason, they'll just say, well, remember here, if we're on the hook for this too, it requires both a deliberate misrepresentation by the purchaser and financial harm to the lender. And we were fine with the terms of the loan, if that gets us all off the hook here. Is that okay? Of course, the issue is you were only considered the lender. You were only on record as being the lender for as long as it took you to flip the mortgage and sell it off to somebody else. Now someone else is allegedly the lender, but they're not the originator, and it's hard to tell whether they were caused financial harm, given that they were supposed to do due diligence before purchasing the mortgage from you anyway. And if they didn't do that, then that's not going to look good for anybody there at that place. So, everybody has an interest in avoiding these charges normally. So, this is not a case of a non-political Justice Department that a non-political Justice Department would even consider bringing to trial normally, or have much hope of winning. And again, it has no relevance at all to Cook's work at the Fed, providing zero justification for dismissal, quote, for cause. But of course, Trump's attempt to fire Cook has nothing to do with the allegations of fraud. Her real crime in his mind is that she isn't an obedient minion. Oh, and that she's a black woman, he adds parenthetically. The goal of his attempt to fire her is to replace independent Fed officials with lackeys who will take Trump's orders, not just by getting rid of Cook, but by intimidating everyone else, which I think is what was perhaps behind the earlier departure from the Fed. As I wrote yesterday, the real message here is if you get in our way, we will ruin your life. The immediate test here, and Cook really hasn't even gotten in his way yet. She's just going along doing Federal Reserve things. There's been no ask of her at this point that she has rejected. He just sees an opportunity to get rid of somebody. And also, I'm sure it's not lost on him that perhaps his base will either not care at all about firing a black woman from the Fed or cheer it on because they're vicious racists. Even though we're not supposed to say that for some strange reason. Anyway, the immediate test here is how the Fed itself responds. Cook is doing the right thing by refusing to resign. Jerome Powell now faces a moment of truth. Will he back her up until or unless Trump demonstrates that he has the legal authority to fire her? What if Trump uses some kind of force, like deployment of U.S. Marshals, to block Cook from continuing to work? Good. Well, I don't know about that, but he says good. Why does he say good? That will demonstrate to everyone the grotesqueness of his power grab. Well, okay, that it will. I don't know if on balance it's good, but okay. And one way or another, this will end up in the courts, where we will find out whether our judicial system has any integrity left. What will all of this mean for financial markets? The markets keep shrugging off the Trump administration's lawlessness, and maybe they'll do it again, but really it doesn't matter. this isn't ultimately about monetary policy. It's about whether we are still a nation of laws. And since we're not, well, I guess we'll find out sooner rather than later. There you go. It's rather remarkable. Anything else here? Some interesting comments below. But if we get into reading all 174 comments on Paul Krugman's piece, well, we'll be here all day. Was there anything else? Let me go back to Instapaper and see if there was anything else. I feel like there was a bit more about this Cook situation. And, well, let's see. The Times was doing a running commentary on things last night. But what is this here? I also put this aside. Yes. Okay. So let's go here. Another Blue Sky comment. This one, a thread from Josh Chaffetz. Is it Chaffetz or Chaffetz? Well, Josh, you can let me know. And we've heard from him before. He's a professor at Georgetown Law. And there's a couple of them that we hear from all the time. Is Steve Vladeck at Georgetown? I can't remember. Anyway, Josh Chaffetz, professor, is the Agnes Williams Sesquicentennial Professor of Law and Politics. Okay, got that word on the record as well. He had something interesting to say from this yesterday. Trump should absolutely not be able to fire Lisa Cook, but this is because he should not be able to fire anyone with statutory tenure protections. Even though, unfortunately, sadly enough, the lunatics on the Supreme Court have decided, actually, he should be able to fire almost everyone with statutory tenure protections. But for some reason, they did set aside a carve-out for the Federal Reserve. The Supreme Court's attempt to draw a line between the Fed and every other independent agency is transparent. Well, Greg, you going to tell them what it is?
That's bullshit.
Exactly. It's transparent BS, we'll say, just to clean things up. Designed to simultaneously serve the conservative legal movement's interest in deregulation via the so-called unitary executive and corporate interests in not crashing the economy. Don't let John Roberts et al. Off the hook by claiming that Trump is somehow defying the court here, like there'll be some temptation to describe what he's doing. If the courts say, no, you can't fire her, or everybody takes the hint from the previous case where they said, there's a carve out for the Fed in this at-will employment arrangement. And the temptation will be to say, well, Trump is defying the court, but Josh makes a good point. Professor Josh, if you will. It makes a good point. Don't let Roberts off the hook by saying that this is defiance of the court. He is, Trump, that is, at most, he is taking advantage of incoherent nonsense in the court's opinions to be, in some sense, more principled than Roberts. Roberts and the court issued a nonsensical ruling and saying, well, despite the statutory protections that independent agency officers have, we're going to allow for their firing. But the Fed would be going a step too far. Why? Well, I don't know. Reasons. And I mean, that's so incoherent and so poorly founded that it is interesting. So Josh is saying here, and I'm only calling him Josh because I don't know whether he's Professor Chaffetz or Professor Chaffetz. But okay, Professor Chaffetz, I don't know, says, the ruling handed down from the court was so nonsensical, poorly reasoned, and just bad cover for the position they preferred to take rather than one they could justify legally, that maybe the person with the most integrity in all of this, as between John Roberts and Donald Trump, is Donald Trump. He recognizes their nonsense for what it is and says, I'm going to exploit it because they purposefully did a bad job just so they could reach a conclusion that made me happy and them comfortable. And they probably shouldn't have done it. It's an excellent point, I thought. And so there you go. Don't let Roberts off the hook by saying Trump is defying the court. He is reading the court closely and taking the fact that they seem to be outcome oriented and just simply looking for ways to get out of Trump's way and taking that at face value and saying, I know you said there was a carve out for the court, but I'm saying, fine, it was a stupid loophole and I'm going to use it. Now, are you going to say the loophole was stupid or not? And the loophole, again, was, well, yeah, you can fire people even at the Fed, but it has to be for cause. And they just didn't bother saying what for cause really meant. The traditional interpretation is one thing, but Donald Trump just says, well, I'm firing her because I want to, is essentially what he's saying. Well, it's alleged that she's committed a crime. Who alleges it? Oh, I do. Well, now he doesn't. He'd say, Bill Pulte does. But remember, unitary executive. So really, in effect, he does. So basically, as soon as he says, I think somebody's committed a crime here. Have I proven it? No, but I think so. And that's cause enough for me. I don't want people accused of crime to be serving in my administration. So that's it. You're fired. Could that possibly be consistent with the ruling of the Supreme Court in whatever case it was that led them to say, yeah, but not for the Fed? Sure, it could be, because there's no way to be consistent with that ruling because the ruling itself was meaningless and stupid and poorly reasoned. So there you go. An interesting observation on the case. I think we're done with the updates there, although maybe I will go over to yesterday's New York Times running commentary and see if that's still where this leads and see if there are any updates. So the top of the board here at the moment in this continuing feed, is it still pointing at the same place? I don't know if it is. I must have marked one of the entries in here. But, this was one of those things where they had several members of the team contributing along the way. And now I guess I'm locked in on one of them. All right. And it just says, it's the one in which she says, look, I'm not stepping down. And I don't think it adds anything at this point. But I happen to see, I think Charlie Savage was commenting on the situation. And let's see, yeah, I don't know whether I can find my way back to that for whatever reason. But I don't know what his commentary on it was. But it wasn't one of the things that I had to absolutely make sure was included. But I thought it would be a good idea. All right, well, I don't know why it doesn't point there anymore. But what can I tell you? I think you've got the basic gist of it here. I wanted to add a couple other things and maybe go back and hit a few highlights on some other previous stories, although that reminds me that there's something in my email that I wanted to go back to that I hope, did I at least star it? Maybe that will help me find it. Yes, now I remember what it was offhand. And it was, although, I think it was in the Patreon notes rather than my email. And it was, if I recall correctly, and of course I recall correctly, what am I talking about? You remember the other day when we were talking about what was going on in Elise Stefanik's district, New York 21, and her being booed off the stage and just her being basically tangled up in all sorts of local politics that was making life difficult for her. Let me see if I can find it over here in the no, that's not the section either. Or maybe it's in the direct messages. I'm looking around. All right. Yes. Okay. So, one, I won't reveal the real and true name of the person who was giving me the tips on what was happening in New York 21, unless I get another note that says, oh yeah, please go ahead and do that. But you remember that I referred to her by the screen name, which I didn't know how to pronounce out loud, of Adkaratic. And I was like, that is kind of unusual, but okay. What might that mean? I don't know. Well, now I have an answer. So Adkaratic, whose name is not Adkaratic, says, thanks for reading the article about Stefanik and the Clinton County Republicans. The Adirondack Daily Enterprise is the only daily newspaper in the 6 million acre Adirondack Park. The epilogue to the story is that Manning came out the next day publicly in support of a candidate for this special election, not herself, Brent Davison, who's a state trooper, by the way. I don't know if I can remind everybody offhand, off the top of my head, of what was going on there, but remember that they needed to find a candidate for a special election in a state legislative race in the area, and that state law under these circumstances leaves it to the party chairs to make the choices, but that generally speaking, this district lay such that 50% or 51% of the voting weight went to the county with the bulk of the population. And so essentially it came down to the county chair for the Democrats was empowered to basically choose this nominee herself. And that word was circulating that she was going to nominate herself for that job. Well, that was supposedly the source of a lot of the infighting about the situation, and she says, oh, actually, by the way, I've decided to not name myself for this. I don't remember if I have the story exactly correct, but basically someone else now stands up for this situation. And was it Republicans that were doing it rather than, I guess so, because that was the controversy was as between Stefanik and the party, not the Democrats on the other side. The Democrats were having an otherwise normal, I think, procedure for this. At any rate, there's a little bit more commentary. And then the important part. Elisa's mouthpiece, DeGrasse, is well known around here as a POS. You know what that might mean. And anyway, is always spouting nasty lies. Oh, and the situation of having the county chairs pick the nominee is in New York election law. I was told that this is the first time that they've had a special election for an assembly seat, at least I guess under this particular set of rules. I don't know. It can't be the first time they've had a special election for an assembly seat, but maybe in that area. That's certainly possible. Anyway, the real point of going back to the source here was to let everybody know that the handle that I was like, I don't know, add Karatic, is actually ADK erratic. And that ADK is for Adirondacks. Erratic, of course, for having rolled up here from somewhere else like an erratic boulder. Okay, so now you have how you pronounce one of those handles you see every day and never have to say out loud because you're just reading it to yourself. ADK erratic. Thanks very much. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Everyone, not just ADK erratic. I don't know whether I would have worked anything like that out by myself. 3 initials I would have thought unusual. I don't know. I guess I sort of had in mind that maybe this person's name was, like their surname was Kerr, Kerr, and the ERR was a funny way of adding on the erratic thing, and we'll call her Karatic. And I don't know, AD could be her initials. She could work in advertising. I don't know. So it doesn't, there's no rules, no rhyme or reason to the way we try and make up a pronunciation for something that we don't normally have to read out loud. But all right, now we have the straight story, and I always appreciate having that. All right, there's more. There's other stuff. I guess the other big story of the day we haven't really touched on yet, which is, and there's like no explaining it at this point, but Kilmar Ábrego García, we mentioned yesterday, we did make mention of it, that the government now, despite a very clear ruling from Judge Zenas, which I think the proceedings ended yesterday essentially with Judge Zenas, Exenas, I don't know, having, so we had a pronunciation of that once, and it's lost in the mists of time, but she made things very clear and just basically said, listen, we can't have this guy rendered out of the country again. It's, you can't even call it deportation because it's just, You're not going anywhere. Costa Rica isn't his home country. Uganda certainly isn't his home country. The United States was taking the position that they were preparing to deport him to Uganda in the middle of all of this. And the judge made it very clear, look, he's not to be moved. And I think his defense counsel said, we really want an order that he can't be moved to any detention facility more than 200 miles away from where he is now. And she was asking, so you think, there's a danger that they might just deport him overnight before we settle this thing? Yes, that's our worry. Well, then I don't think he should be moved from the detention facility he's in right now. I don't want to hear anything about this guy moving, and certainly not anything about him leaving the country. Is that clear to the government counsel? And they, nodded and went along. What else are they going to say? And she's like, do I need to commit that to writing, or is my oral order sufficient for you to understand that I don't want to see anything or hear anything about this guy moving until we've figured this case out and settled things? Well, oral order is sufficient, Your Honor. And I don't know whether she took him at his word or not, but that's what I heard. That's where I heard things stood as of yesterday. And yet, though, the government, the Department of Homeland Security, White House, etc., has spent the evening trolling the country, telling everybody, well, we're going to send him to Uganda anyway, and we're going to get rid of him, and we're going to ship him out of the country, and he's totally guilty of a bunch of things that we haven't been able to prove or even substantiate in any way, shape, or form. And we're in court right now, and we still refuse to tell anybody about why we think we're entitled to say, though he's totally a gang member and totally doing trafficking. So I guess it's a good test of what's going on here today to see whether they somehow have spirited him out of the country or just taken half measures and moved him to another facility just to test how serious Judge Zinis is about this stuff. Let me find out what's going on with the judge, perhaps, and use her name as a search term and see what's in the news, top headlines. Anything from more than or less than 12 hours ago? That I don't think so. So everything sort of settled in place at the close of the courtroom proceedings yesterday, and that is good. Where shall we borrow our reading from? Is it wise to... Maybe it might be wisest to take it from the BBC at this point. I think that they think that they're beyond Trump's reach. Judge temporarily blocks Ábrego Garcia's deportation. There's a name that we learned how to pronounce at one point, and because of how unusual it was. Is it Tom Gogin? Is that what we decided? Rats. Is that even the name that I was thinking of? It's Geoghan. I'm going to go with Tom Gogin on that. And Kayla Epstein. Gosh, I wish I could remember. Anyway, the real point of this story is that a federal judge has temporarily blocked the U.S. government from deporting Kilmar Ábrego García to another country after immigration officers took him into custody at a check-in this morning. Just another one of the people trying to live up to their obligation to take their case through the judicial system, and they keep arresting him every time he shows up to do that. Anyway, the government brought Mr. Ábrego García back to the U.S. after mistakenly deporting him to a notorious prison in El Salvador in March, and has since charged him with human trafficking. And somebody else on Blue Sky made the very important point that we should be normalizing referring to Ábrego García as a political prisoner, ordinarily something that people shy away from because we normally have the rule of law in this country, and that generally prevents us from having people who are strictly held as political prisoners. But the term seems apt here. It was Christian Farias who happened to have written this. Is that someone we do know, should know? Legal journalist and beachgoer. Oh, I know him as a famous beachgoer. Writing about courts and the law for Vanity Fair. I know we probably have read his articles or things he's contributed to then. It's likely. Anyway, good point. Normalize calling Kilmar Ábrego García a political prisoner. His criminalization, rearrest, and the campaign to deport him to a third country aren't legitimate by any stretch, and that's really true. The reason I like the idea in which, there's some more here. It actually precedes this comment, in which the New Yorker asked me for my thoughts on the rearrest of Kilmar Ábrego García, which I boiled down to a few sentences. All right, how bad is it, is the question. Kilmar Ábrego García, the man who was wrongfully deported to El Salvador by the Trump administration earlier this year and whose return to the U.S. the Supreme Court ordered the government to facilitate, was detained again today, a couple days ago, in Baltimore. He now faces another potential deportation, this time to Uganda. How bad is it? The political prosecution of Kilmar Ábrego García has entered a new phase. Christian Farias, the legal journalist who has written about various Trump-era court cases for The New Yorker, told us over email. Before, he was just a Salvadoran immigrant worker who was wrongfully deported. Everyone was on the same page about that, even a unanimous Supreme Court, which ordered the government to facilitate his return to the U.S. But then something shifted. In the intervening months, the Trump administration has waged a campaign of demonization, criminalization, and political prosecution against him. And since that shift, Kilmar Ábrego García has been a political prisoner. His rearrest this morning by ICE after his release on Friday and a brief reunification with his family in Maryland is just a piece of that persecution. So I think excellent points all around on that one, because essentially they made a mistake and deported him incorrectly, and at least it was a deportation. He is in fact Salvadoran, and they sent him to El Salvador, but he was under a do not deport order. Look, he's a political refugee, and there was a standing court order not to deport him to El Salvador. So of course, they went ahead and did it anyway. And everybody acknowledged it was a mistake. But rather than acknowledge the mistake, they insisted, we don't have any control anymore. And because we have no control anymore, he's never getting out. And they only wanted to say they had no control so they could facilitate standing behind the claim that he was never going to return. Then he did return, of course. But rather than just admit the mistake and when he comes back say, it was a confusing time for everybody. But I guess will honor the the order against his deportation from here on in. But rather than do that, rather than just admit the mistake, they're coming up with, let's charge him with something. Let's say he's a gang member. Let's say he's involved in human trafficking, and threaten him with more deportation. If it can't be El Salvador, then it'll be somewhere else, and we'll come up with somewhere really bad to deport him to. What Donald Trump refers to as, S-hole countries, probably on the list there. Costa Rica is not bad, but okay. Anyway, the point really was that I think Christian was making here is, you can, I think, fairly call him a political prisoner at this point. It is politics only that demands his further persecution. He's never been really honestly and fairly suspected of gang membership, and never really honestly or fairly suspected of human trafficking. Those are just boogeymen that the Trump administration knows will satisfy the MAGA base. If I say he did those things, they'll believe me, and those are bad things, so they'll be on our side for the deportation. Entirely political. So yes, political prisoner. Well put. Let me see. Did I open that up correctly and save that for later? Yes, fine. Okay, something else happening here that I want to check in. As Quinta Jurecic posts on Blue Sky, New Jersey is currently operating under purge rules. A gift link article at The Atlantic. Trump loses a lawyer and much more, and it's the face of Alina Habba. So I want to check in on what the developments are there. Is this a current piece? Yes, something from today. So a bit of an update on Alina. Trump loses a lawyer. You know about that and why. And much more. What's the much more? If Alina Habba's appointment is illegal, so is much more of Trump's DOJ takeover, says Quinta Jurecic herself in writing this piece. And it's a gift piece, so we can't look a gift piece in the mouth, mostly because a gift piece has no mouth, but if it did, there would be a social convention against looking at it, we think. A line in the musical Hamilton claims, everything is legal in New Jersey. That's unfair. I haven't seen the show, so I don't know the context. This is not precisely true. At the moment, however, nobody seems to know who in the state is in charge of enforcing federal law. Ah, yes, that's a good question. Good point. Last Thursday, a judge, and who cares about them, a judge ruled that Alina Habba, Donald Trump's pick to head the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, has been illegally leading the office since July 1st. That doesn't just cause problems for Habba going forward. If Habba was not legitimately in office, the prosecutions that took place under her are now all in question. The administration has appealed the ruling. I am the pick of the president, Habba insisted on Fox News. I will serve this country. The chaos around Habba is a glimpse into the dubious methods by which Trump has bent the rules to stock his government with loyalists. Now those maneuvers have upended prosecutors' work in New Jersey and potentially around the country. And what do I always tell you? Check the paperwork. On virtually anything that you don't like that Trump has done, check the paperwork. You will find out that it is faulty. And to the extent that paperwork matters to anyone and can establish the legal outcome, well then you'll be able to undo things. Typically, the president nominates U.S. attorneys for confirmation by the Senate, which gives the president's choice a thumbs up or thumbs down. The statutes that allow temporary appointments are structured that way for a reason. As with all Senate-confirmed positions, the Senate's constitutional power to advise and consent on U.S. attorney nominations is meant as a check against the president selecting candidates whose only merit, as described in the Federalist Papers, is, quote, of being in some way or other personally allied to him, or of possessing the necessary insignificance and pliancy to render them the obsequious instruments of his pleasure. Yowza. Jeffrey Epstein. Anyway, but this is exactly what Trump finds appealing about appointees like Habba, one of his closer advisors. Trump originally selected Habba in late March under a statute that allows the president to select an interim U.S. attorney, or rather, in this case, it empowers the attorney general to name an interim U.S. attorney. And ordinarily that would be done independently. But Pam Bondi, living under Donald Trump's thumb, we make the slip and say that Trump originally selected Habba under a statute that allows the president to select an interim U.S. attorney when the chief prosecutor's office is vacant. Really, again, AG. Interim appointments expire after 120 days. From that point on, judges in the district may make their own selection. In June, the president officially nominated Habba to fill the position via the normal process. The Senate did nothing to move on Habba's nomination, and on July 22nd, 120 days since Trump had announced that he had appointed Habba effective immediately, the New Jersey judges selected a career prosecutor in the office, Desiree Grace, for the role instead. Judges' authority to make such picks has been previously uncontroversial, but the Trump administration exploded with rage. When judges act like activists, they undermine confidence in our justice system, scolded Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche on Twitter. The Justice Department devised a solution to slide Habba back into the job, a Rube Goldberg series of maneuvers taking advantage of the tangle of authorities that governs temporary appointments. Grace, a registered Republican, who had previously earned accolades for her aggressive prosecution of violent crime, was fired. Oh no, a leopard ate your face. Rawr. Habba dropped her bid for the permanent role and was reappointed not as interim U.S. attorney, but as a special attorney and the first assistant to the U.S. attorney, who did not exist at the time, allowing Habba to step into that role under a different law, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. Essentially, Habba became her own chief aide, or as I put it to you, bootstrapping. They bootstrapped her into this position. Okay, I can't make her the U.S. attorney. Well, then I'll make her the first assistant U.S. attorney, fire the person purporting to be the U.S. attorney at the time, thereby creating a vacancy, and then point at a different act that says if there's a vacancy at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the first assistant, who is the person I meant to have the U.S. Attorney job, can automatically move in. That's some serious bootstrapping. In his ruling last week, Judge Matthew Brand said that the scheme violated the Vacancies Reform Act. But who cares? Among other problems with the reappointment, the judge held that the statute forbids slotting a first assistant into the top job if the assistant was appointed after the vacancy in question arose, which in Habba's case is exactly what the Justice Department did. So really, with a little bit of patience, they could have avoided that problem and made Habba second in command and then fired the first in command, although that would certainly violate the spirit of the law. Habba was, in fact, the second temporary U.S. attorney to be slotted back into the job in this manner. It's almost like Quint has been listening to us here. In the Northern District of New York, the district's judges declined to appoint John Sarcone, as the U.S. attorney after his interim appointment expired on July 15th, following a rocky 120 days during which the Albany Times-Union reported that the residence Sarcone had listed in the city appeared to be an abandoned building. U.S. attorneys are required to live in the district they oversee, she notes. Sarcone, too, that is to say also, not Sarcone II, John Sarcone III's father, was transformed into acting U.S. attorney. What kind? Acting, right, by becoming his own first assistant. Although details are hard to come by, the Trump administration seems to have used a similar sleight of hand in extending the terms of temporary U.S. attorneys in, I didn't even know this, right, in New Mexico, Nevada, and the Central District of California. So 3 more to keep an eye on there. These temporary leaders have struggled to gain the respect of their offices. In California, we need more. Acting U.S. Attorney Bill Essayli, perhaps? Not assailant, but Essayli, Essayli. What's he been doing? He has pursued exorbitant criminal charges against anti-ICE protesters. That'll ingratiate you to the boss. Reportedly notching an embarrassing string of defeats in front of grand juries that refused to charge. That's happening here in D.C., by the way, as ace lawyer Jeanine Pirro has apparently failed in 3 attempts to get a grand jury to agree to charge one of the defendants, whose name escapes me, but it's out there and available, and we'll find it on social media if we go looking. But let's see, we'll put that as a note to self over here. But 3 times they've been trying to charge this one woman with, I don't know what, and I forget what they were mad about her doing, and it might have been filming the police making an ICE kidnapping. It may have been protesting somewhere. It may have been shouting at ICE officers who are walking the streets. But it's somewhere along those lines. It's not, as many people thought might be the case, the sandwich thrower guy, although I think they'll likewise find that it's difficult to get a grand jury to charge him. At least that was more obviously a stupid looking but chargeable type of assault. But anyway, people pointing out that here in DC, 3 times they couldn't get 3 different grand juries refused to indict her. And I mean, that's a great tool, by the way, in DC in particular, which is so mad about their occupation by National Guard troops and federal law enforcement officials to the point of ridiculousness. They may start doing this. Grand juries might just start getting fed up and saying, we're just not going to allow you the weapons you need to weaponize the Department of Justice. We're going to take away that first weapon you've got. Now, they can still levy charges against her, and I think they're going to. They just have to knock them down to misdemeanor charges, for which they don't need a grand jury's say-so. And they'll probably work that way. But something else to watch around the country. So we didn't know that this was happening also in the Central District of California. By the way, just so you know, when the terminology comes up, when a grand jury refuses to indict, when they do indict, we just hear about it in the newspaper. Hey, grand jury indicted them. But, inside the courtroom, they say they are handing up, not handing down. A sentence gets handed down. Why does a sentence get handed down while an indictment gets handed up? It's not just because they're heading in opposite directions it is actually, because they're heading in opposite directions in the courtroom, but the indictment being the beginning of the process and the sentence being the end. But a sentence is handed down from the bench to you lower beings down here who exist beneath me physically for symbolic reasons in the courtroom. Whereas an indictment is handed up. Why? It is handed from the grand jury box to the judge, who is, again, elevated against above everybody else, and he or she will read out, okay, we got something here. It's an indictment, everybody, which has just been handed up to me. Now I'm handing it back down to you, cops, go arrest this guy, whatever, but that's the way we do it. Indictment's handed up, sentence can be handed down. But at any rate, what do we say about it when it's handed up? Well, we don't know what it is until the judge reads it aloud and says what's going on. And if they say, yep, we're indicting that person, then what was handed up? A bill of indictment. In fact, a true bill of indictment. They just say goes by the name of true bill. Now, what happens when you say, no, we're not indicting that guy? Well, it's not a bill of indictment. In fact, it's no bill at all, apparently, because that's what they call it. No bill. So the shorthand of no bill means, yeah, the grand jury says, nope, we don't find probable cause for indictment here. And I don't even know if that's not the standard. Forget my criminal procedure. That's not even the standard, right? Or is it reasonable suspicion is all that's necessary at this stage of the game? Or is it probable cause to believe that a crime has been, they refer to different stages of, and criminal attorneys will know right off the bat, but not me. Anyway, but it's certainly not beyond a reasonable doubt, which everybody knows. Everyone knows what stage of the game that is about, and that's at the jury decision on guilt or innocence, or not guilty or not guilty. They don't ever say innocent. Anyway, so yeah, 3 no bills in a row for ace lawyer Jeanine Pirro. Known here about as winning the no bill prize. Someone who escapes indictment 3 times is a no bill laureate, we're saying here, but only to great groans. So, out in Central California, they're having the same problem. At least Bill Essayli is having the same problem. In New Mexico, another one of our acting U.S. attorneys, Ryan Ellison's office, faced repeated admonition from judges over his insistence on prosecuting migrants for trespassing in a freshly created military zone along the U.S.-Mexico border. You remember that one? They militarized the border, though there was no military exercises going on there, but by declaring it military property, anybody who crossed the border there was automatically in violation of federal law in a more serious way and could be scooped up. Well, the judges don't want to stand for that one. And in Nevada, another one of the acting U.S. attorneys, Sigal Chattah, has a history of racist remarks against black officials. That won't go over well. Once commenting that the state's attorney general, Aaron Ford, who is black, oh my goodness, should be hanging from a fucking crane. Wow. That'll get you in trouble ordinarily, but, not in the Trump administration. Habba, too, has had a rocky tenure as chief prosecutor. During her first months as New Jersey's U.S. Attorney at New Jersey's U.S. Attorney's Office, she promised on a podcast, and you know how bad that can be, to turn New Jersey red, not with blood per se, but that is politically speaking, oversaw the filing of criminal charges against Newark Mayor Ross Baraka and Democratic Representative LaMonica McIver after the two clashed with ICE agents at an immigration detention facility, and decorated a conference room with pictures of herself. Okay. The office dropped the charges against Baraka, but only once a magistrate judge excoriated prosecutors for bringing what appeared to be a politically motivated case. Democratic senators in these states have voiced concerns over these appointees and could block any formal nomination for so long as Republicans respect existing Senate norms. Trump regularly rages against these constraints, but the scheme around, not the censoring horn so much as the acting. Oh, no, did I get rid of my censoring horn? Well, that was a mistake. Oh, well. And I could have just played it and left it at that. Dang it. All right. Well, that's an ongoing problem. Habba is, where were we with this? Trump regularly rages against these constraints, but so far officials haven't had to worry about securing confirmation. Instead, they can focus on pleasing the president. Habba is the only prosecutor from this group whose appointment has been challenged in court. A handful of defendants in criminal cases argued that the charges against them should be thrown out because Habba's appointment was invalid. This is how the case ended up before Judge Brand of the Middle District of Pennsylvania, who joked during a hearing that he had been assigned to oversee the naughty litigation for my sins. All of the district judges in New York. I was wondering about this, and I said, didn't we discuss something like this yesterday? I wonder if the same play is afoot. And it is. All the district judges in New Jersey have been barred from the case because of their role in appointing Habba's short-lived successor. Once again, the divorce law parallel there, right? Disqualifying entire federal benches like they did in Maryland with what were we talking about yesterday? I can't even remember. But filing suit against all of the federal judges in Maryland because of the Ábrego García case and others that they've had disagreements about. Well, now they've done it to New Jersey, and Pennsylvania has to step in.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen versus Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I hope you heard me on the way out there, but I was noting the parallels between the story we commented on yesterday where the DOJ had filed suit against the federal bench, the entire federal bench of Maryland, probably just with the aim of disqualifying them from, one, ruling on the what would otherwise be the appeal of their findings in Ábrego García's case and other similarly situated immigration cases, but now doing the same thing here in New Jersey. So if a judge is going to rule on whether or not Alina Habba has been legitimately appointed and is in fact the acting U.S. attorney for New Jersey, we got to go outside of New Jersey and find somebody from a nearby state who can step in and handle the case. Oh, and by the way, in yesterday's recounting of what was going on in Maryland, I mistakenly thought that Maryland might be perhaps in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, but they're in fact in the Fourth Circuit. New Jersey and Pennsylvania, I guess, is Pennsylvania Third Circuit? It must be. I think that's why they borrowed from Pennsylvania in trying to find somebody to sit in on this New Jersey case. But yeah, Third Circuit is like New Jersey and Delaware and and Pennsylvania. Okay, so there you go. And the Virgin Islands, by the way. I'm sure that Jeffrey Epstein would be happy to know that somehow, if he were alive. I don't know. Who? Jeffrey Epstein. Right. That's who I was talking about. Okay. And similarly down in Maryland, after having disqualified everybody in Maryland, they need somebody else to step in. They would be borrowing from, presumably the rules say you want to borrow from the same circuit. Fourth Circuit, not third. All right, back to what Quinta Jurecic was saying here. Habba is the only one who's had their appointment challenged so far, but the challenge has to go before a judge from Pennsylvania because everybody from New Jersey is barred from the case by this maneuver, which I think is intentional and is happening in at least two places. So it leads me to believe that that's the intention. Although Judge Brand declined to dismiss the prosecutions outright, that was the only win for the Justice Department. In finding the government's shell game around Habba's appointment illegal, he left little wiggle room for Habba to remain in the role. The judge did pause his ruling, because they always do for the Republicans, but not necessarily for Democrats. The judge did pause his ruling to give the government time to appeal. However, the litigation has already cast doubt over the normal process of law enforcement in the state, as prosecutors scramble to shore up their cases against challenges to Habba's illegitimate involvement. During a hearing held by Judge Brand, New Jersey Assistant U.S. Attorney Mark Coyne explained that some New Jersey judges had paused work on criminal cases while they waited for confusion over Habba's role to be resolved. Shortly after Judge Brand ruled, another federal judge indefinitely delayed a sentencing in a New Jersey fraud case. I wonder if it's mortgage fraud. A fraud case over concerns as to whether Habba had any authority to supervise the prosecution. Other defendants may soon raise their own challenges, both in New Jersey and the Northern District of New York, as well as the other districts with temporary appointees. Because Brand's ruling is on hold, it's not clear what authority Habba might be able to exercise going forward without potentially upending months of prosecutors' work down the road should higher courts find that she really is not in her role legally. The Trump administration chose to risk this chaos. Senate confirmations often move slowly, which can lead to delays in confirming U.S. attorneys, but past administrations have dealt with this problem by allowing longtime career officials to run prosecutors' offices while nominations are pending, an approach explicitly allowed by the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, and which is in fact the norm and how things work. And there won't be any challenges to it because that's the way it's always worked, and nobody's expectations are upended by following this procedure. There's no shortage of qualified professionals like the fired Desiree Grace available to take on such temporary roles. Trump, though, has decided that it's more important to him to install loyalists whom he can trust to harass his enemies and go easy on his friends. Whether that upends actual work of law enforcement is apparently beside the point. The effects of this choice may ripple beyond the Justice Department. Judge Brand's ruling would sharply constrain the president's choice of acting officials in Senate-confirmed offices of all sorts, I guess, requiring many of the Trump-selected temporary leaders currently running various agencies to be replaced with career government employees, provided there are any, or they haven't all been forced out previously. It would also prevent the administration from filling vacant offices by delegating power to temporary officials like David Richardson, who is currently running FEMA under the ungainly title of Senior Official Performing the Duties of FEMA Administrator. Information on what authority any given official is acting under, what is he doing? Acting under, can be difficult to come by, but such placeholders may currently make up a non-negligible chunk of administration officials. According to data compiled by the Washington Post and the Partnership for Public Service, Trump has yet to nominate anyone to almost 300 out of 800 tracked Senate-confirmed positions, and only 126 nominees have been confirmed by the Senate. Attorney General Pam Bondi seems committed to fighting for Habba, in part as a way of continuing the administration's efforts to delegitimize the courts by decrying activist judges. Judge Brand, it's worth noting, is no one's definition of a liberal. He was once active in the Pennsylvania Republican Party and is a member of the Federalist Society and the National Rifle Association. I don't know, whatever. Even setting aside the New Jersey U.S. Attorney's Office, the sheer scope of temporary officials affected by Brand's ruling practically required the administration to appeal. Although why not just sue the federal bench of Pennsylvania and disqualify them as well? I don't know. now that's open to them, I guess. A government operating by handshake and mutual understanding may go along swimmingly, Judge Brand wrote, but only for so long as everyone is willing to play by the rules. Other presidents have taken advantage of this approach to gain some flexibility in the face of Senate delays. Trump, though, has stretched things to the breaking point. Now they may finally have snapped. Thanks, Quinta, for following along. And we'll pretend you were listening to the show or watching me on social media and having the exact same thoughts. But I have a feeling that might have been flowing in reverse. Anyway, it was fun while it lasted. So let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you. We got to go back to Instapaper and look again. Oh, yes. I wanted to turn back. This is all about looking backwards. No more looking to the future on this. Yesterday, I also spent some time describing what was going on down in Fulton County, Georgia, where, by way of example, because there are so many people on social media and elsewhere saying Dems are never fighting back. They never fight fire with fire. And here were some folks doing it. But it was so interesting to me in uncovering that story that they were fighting fire with fire in a very interesting way. That is to say, Republicans sort of began the game of, well, I'm just not listening to the courts. Courts, with their stupid paper rulings, I don't want to listen to them. And, the only mechanism they have to enforce those rulings is contempt, but they're chicken to do it. Like with most things, they proceed very cautiously, and they're going to find it hard in most cases, at least when there's a Republican in the dock, to imprison or fine people for contempt of court to try to enforce compliance with court orders. But if it's a Democrat, I guess it's a different story. So the story from yesterday was that there were members of, and there are two different bodies here, members of the Fulton County government, essentially. They, what do they call them there? I don't know. The commissioners, Fulton County commissioners, which here in Virginia is the Board of Supervisors. It's the county-wide government. But also the county has a board of elections, a separate body, which apparently, 5-member panel that handles all the election rules and decisions and mechanisms, etc. Each of the two major parties, and this is probably something that we should revisit at some point. Maybe it's an outdated mode of choosing, but we've been a two-party system for so long that we've come to rely on it in some ways that are now proving awkward and stupid. But each of the two parties, and why only two, I don't know, because they get the majority of the votes or something, get to nominate 2 members of this elections board. And the 5th member is nominated as chair, is nominated, chosen by the board of, what were they calling them again? The commissioners, the county government. So, it's certainly possible if one party or another dominates the county, they'll choose the chair, and, somebody's got to break the ties if it's 2-2. It's also very interesting just as a basis for making that choice. Well, each of the two parties, everyone knows there's only 2 serious parties here in the United States. One of the parties is no longer serious, and that's one of the real problems. But also you get a situation like, I don't know what Fulton County is like. Maybe it's fairly closely divided. But what about a county where it's overwhelmingly one or the other, right? So, they'll gain nominal control of the elections board by virtue of having a 2-2 tie broken by a chair nominated by the county commissioners, who presumably are part of the same party that if there's overwhelming registration for one party or the other, so that it'll be 3-2 and no one will be complaining. Generally speaking, the party that dominates will be getting their way. But it's interesting, just as a thought exercise all by itself. If a county is 90% Democratic, let's say, and so the elections board will end up being 3-2. But if there's like 15 Republicans in the county and they're all wackadoodles, and you kind of almost have to be an activist in the party when in the Republican Party in a county where it's just 90% Democratic. You're almost a crackpot by definition. But if you're also on top of it all, the only kind of person who would be willing to put up with this nonsense, generally even more of a crackpot. What ends up happening is you say, well, I guess in the end, nobody complains because it's going to be 3-2 Democrats and things will go along swimmingly. But in the meantime, you got a situation where you're obligated by law, it would appear, to sit there and listen to the two weirdest Republican crackpots anybody can find in the whole county before outvoting them. And everybody has to roll their eyes, and every friggin' hearing of every one of these boards meetings is like, oh my God, here they go again. Aliens flew down from space and put fluoride on my ballot. And, do we have to really be listening to this? But you have to by law, because the other party is entitled to it, because out there in the country, we're evenly divided by these two parties. Not here, but, in an attempt to look fair, probably, the legislators are saying, well, we're going to split things evenly. Well, why? But it's not a dissimilar problem that we're facing with redistricting commissions in places dominated now these days by Democrats, where they say, we don't want these Republicans or anybody else for that matter doing partisan redistricting. We're going to have an independent commission do it. That's fine. All well and good, but the Republican Party, where they control it, say, we're not handing things anything over to an independent commission. We're going to use this power to the hilt. So now you have a situation where there's those same two parties again, one of which says we're going to do things on a nonpartisan basis, and the other of which says we're going to murder all the other guys from the other party. And, well, we'll see how that works out as between them. They'll find some middle ground, and you know how it goes from there. So anyway, very interesting. I don't know what this breakdown is in Fulton County, but the interesting part of the story was first that there were Democrats saying, I don't know, we see Republicans all the time saying they're just not going to comply with judges' orders. They got Emil Bove telling people, tell judges to go F themselves. That's your instructions. So now judges were saying, okay, the law is that Republicans get to nominate two people to your elections board here in Fulton County, and Democrats get to nominate two people to your elections board, and the elected commissioners will name the fifth. So the Republican Party went ahead and named their people, and they were crackpot wackadoodles. But now you got members of the Fulton County commissioners who are supposed to vote on whether or not to, and they're supposed to officially make people members of this elections board by saying, okay, we hear you. You've made your nominations. As stupid as they are, those are your nominations. That's the rules. Go ahead. But these people are so crazy that Democrats and maybe even some Republicans on the county commission are saying, I can't put my yes vote next to this person's name. They're too dumb, too weird, too crazy, too partisan, too out there. And so now they're having a fight over whether or not the commissioners have the flexibility to vote no at all on people who are nominated by the parties, which on the face of it would be somewhat troubling for us rule of law people and we folks who think that, all right, as dumb as it is to say it's going to be 2-2, that is the rule. And you wouldn't want this to happen to you in a county that's 90% Republican, so go ahead and do it. But by the same token, you know, at some point, Democrats are going to want to be able to cheer for people who stand up and say, they say F you to judges all the time. What's wrong with my saying F you to judges? Well, you're a Democrat. That's what's wrong with it. But on top of that, one of the people that they're saying no to for nominations to the elections panel is actually an incumbent being renominated. I guess her term comes to an end. And they have a very good idea of exactly what a wackadoodle she is because she's been on the board the whole time. And as a matter of fact, this person on the board exercised what an authority she claimed for herself. But when others claim it for themselves, apparently this is a no-no. This particular board member, and I'll see, I don't know if I can remember her name offhand. Is it Julia? I don't know. It was an easy and simple name. I just want to make sure I got it right. So we'll wait until we have it come up. But the issue here was that when she was already serving on the elections panel in 2024, you remember this from yesterday? If you weren't listening to the show yesterday, you need this catch up. But if you were, sorry. She refused to certify the results of the 2024 presidential primary in Fulton County, saying, I don't know that there wasn't fraud. I need to see all sorts of information needed to be handed over to me from elections officials, and I want to personally inspect it. And while the concerns may have been valid without, absent any examination into what they were, and any examination to what those concerns were would reveal them. No, they are in fact stupid and invalid. This rises to the level of space aliens applying chemtrails to bamboo ballots. But she refused to vote to validate the results, and they had the same fight in court and said, do members of the elections board have the authority to make this kind of independent inquiry, or is this vote in fact a ministerial one? And the answer was, no, it's ministerial. You can't refuse to certify the elections. Well, she's refused all along, and she's in court, and right up until this past month, they hadn't gotten an answer from the courts yet, and they just did finally get an answer from the courts. Yeah, you're wrong. It's a function you have to fulfill. You have no choice, which is interesting because reappointing her to the board is troublesome for the commissioners. And the commissioners are saying, I don't know, for a year plus, she got away with not casting a vote in favor of someone that she thought was, or something that she thought was stupid and partisan and troubling. Why can't we do the same thing? And the answer is you both can't. But why can't we make this last a year? Well, maybe we can. I just thought that was an interesting part of the story. And I looked back at some earlier reporting about it, just to give you the names of the players who were standing up about this. Fulton County Commissioners disobeyed Georgia judge's order to appoint members to election board. Ross Williams writes for the Georgia Recorder. And it's not that lengthy story, but I just found it interesting and worthy of note. But I think I kind of filled in the background here. But just to see if they can put it more clearly and succinctly, the Fulton County Board of Commissioners violated a Georgia Superior Court judge's order on Wednesday, last week, by failing to approve two nominees to the county election board in a case that involves accusations of election denialism and a clash between elected leaders' responsibilities to follow the law or vote their conscience. We're not complying with the court orders, said Commissioner Bridget Thorne, a Republican, and I can't tell whether she's saying I'm going to join them in not complying with the court order, or we as a board aren't complying with them. We should. I'm voting to comply with them, but others aren't. I don't know what she's saying. But she is a Republican who represents North Fulton. We've had two hearings, one on Friday, one on Monday, forcing us to comply, and the decision today was not to comply. And I just don't understand where she's coming from in that. I guess you had to be there. The vote came down 2-2, with 3 members of the commission not present. Georgia Republican Party Chairman Josh McCoon called the development outrageous and called for the commissioners to be punished, even though I don't know whether he was party chair at the time, but I'm sure he would have denied that it was outrageous for this returning member to have refused to certify the vote in 2024. And I'm sure he wasn't calling for her to be punished. A petition for contempt of Judge David Emerson's order should be filed immediately, and I hope the judge will consider not only a fine but jail time for the unlawful defiance of a lawful court order, McCoon said in a statement. On Thursday, the Fulton County Republican Party filed a motion asking the court to find 5 Democratic commissioners in contempt of court, including the 3 who weren't present for the vote. Why? The county GOP requests the 5 commissioners be charged up to $1,000 and spend up to 20 days in jail. They also called for a hearing to be set As early as Friday, Commissioner Dana Barrett, a Democrat whose district includes all of the Atlanta neighborhoods of Buckhead and parts of Midtown and the suburb of Sandy Springs, said she doesn't know what could come next. It's really hard to say. I don't know what's in the judge's mind about that. He can choose jail or fines, I think, and that's really going to be up to him. I think the jail thing is a little bit confusing because when it's a civil charge like this, the whole idea is that you'll be in jail until you solve the problem, which we can't vote from jail. So I'm not sure if it really works in this case, but I think he has the ability to do it. So making the vote, for me, I had to be prepared to face those consequences. The Fulton County Registration and Elections Board, which is at issue here, consists of 2 members appointed by each major political party, maybe a dumb rule, and a chair selected by the Board of Commissioners, right? We got that part. Fulton County, home to Atlanta, is Georgia's most populous county with more than 1 million residents and among the likeliest to support Democratic candidates, though the northern suburbs are more conservative. In May, the Fulton County Republican Party nominated incumbent board member Julie Adams, that's the person we're talking about, and relative newcomer to the board anyway, Jason Frazier. But the commissioners declined to approve their nominations, citing concerns about their past actions. Adams refused to certify the 2024 results in Fulton's presidential preference primary and filed a failed lawsuit against the county, arguing that board members have the option to refuse to certify election results if they have concerns. In a ruling similar to the one now at issue with the commission, judges said election superintendents' roles are actually to certify the results and not to investigate or veto them. Frazier has been involved with challenges to thousands of Fulton County voter registrations. Speaking at the May meeting, Commissioner Marvin Arrington, a Democrat whose district includes parts of Atlanta and South Fulton County, said he could not approve the 2 because of their politics. This is very interesting. Now, he's taking that position, and then he goes on to say, as many elected Democrats do, the problem we have in this country is the far right and the far left, he said. The answers and the solutions are in the middle. And I want to applaud the Democratic Party for nominating people that are in the center and not nominating people that are in the far left. And I think that the Republican Party ought to take a look at their people and not nominate people that are on the far right and nominate people that are in the center. That's where all of our answers and solutions are. There is no way I can vote to support either of these people. But if you all present some people that are in the center, they can get approved. Now, it's an interesting formulation. It may even be true. And he may be a very fine guy. But I do want to point out, by the way, that most of the people who are most of the problematic people and some number of the people who consider themselves to be in the center, by the way, would say the very act of refusing to approve the Republican nominees, even though it's very obvious that they're far right, I mean, he's correct. They shouldn't be approving them. And you don't want far anybody necessarily on it. But the thing is that the Republicans, both in Fulton County and nationally, would point to your refusal to accept the Republican Party's nominees as the act of a far left person. They think what you're doing is taking far left activist position. You're defending the middle. And you are. I think it's a very centrist position to say, look, these people should not be wackadoodle activists on either side. Now, there's only one side actually doing that. Would probably pay to acknowledge that at some point, but I understand the political position not to do that. But I want you to know that the President of the United States and his entire party believe that the thing you're doing is, quote unquote, far left, and that only a far left person would do it. They're just trying to redefine what's left and what's center. And it is, in fact, a centrist position to refuse to accept the Republican nominees in a case like this. I think that's why I went back to this story and why I went to this article. Arrington, though, was not present for Wednesday's vote, as it happens. And we'll finish up here because we're getting to the end of the show today. The county GOP took the commissioners to court, where the legal debate centered around the meaning of the word shall in state law. The law says the members of the board shall appoint 2 members appointed by each major party, while the chair is appointed by the Board of Commissioners. The county GOP said that shall means the board's job is to approve the people nominated by the parties as long as they meet basic required standards like living in the county, being an elector, and not being an elected official. Apparently, there's no rule about being in your right mind, you see. And that would be subjective anyway. Democrats on the board said the word shall leaves more wiggle room, that the power to appoint also includes the power to reject. And honestly, if there's a vote, there must be a reason for it. I don't know. I don't know if I like this idea of setting up votes merely as rubber stamps, but okay. I am very willing to appoint from nominees that are put forth by the Republican Party of Fulton County, Barrett said, but not everybody gets a pass. What if they put up a murderer? I'm not going to appoint a murderer. Good point there. Nobody's going to want to do that as an elected official. So there has to be some discretion on my part to say no to particular nominees, but still only choose from their nominees. That's not a bad point. Superior Court Judge David Emerson agreed with the Republican Party, though, issuing an August 3rd order calling on the commissioners to approve Adams and Frazier. There's nothing in the statute to support the Board of Commissioners' theory that the county commissioners can veto the chairperson's nominees other than for failure of the nominee to meet the two qualifications and one restriction, Emerson wrote. The General Assembly placed the discretion in the County Executive Committee chairperson. It's up to the Fulton County Commission to follow the law and honor that person's nominations, he added. They didn't do that on Wednesday, and Commissioner Mo Ivory, a Democrat who represents Atlanta and parts South, indicated that she's not likely to change her stance. I guess not. But now we're super late in getting out of here, and we got to clear the way for Justice Putnam to take things from here and move on. We almost made it to the end of this article. There's a little bit more detail in there, and it's definitely of interest. But yeah, one of those weird legal situations, and one of those weird situations, oddly, that Republicans seem to be entirely hypocritical in. But of course, now they can point at Democrats and say they're being hypocritical. Okay, it's a tie. We're both equally hypocritical. Now, how do you prefer us on the issues of policy, I suppose? You could ask it that way. At the very least, though, rank and file Democrats can point to a place, they don't know it yet, but now they can point to a place where Democrats are attempting to avail themselves of the same luxuries. Oh, the court said that? Well, what if I don't effing care one way or the other? Or what are you going to do to make me do it? Or is this rule really sensible that we have to accept the nominations of a party that just isn't playing the same game as the other party? Why are they working on equal terms? Why are they equally regarded? Well, that upsets a lot more of the apple cart than originally thought. And all right, makes for a very interesting question. Now, as I said, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What's he got on tap? Well, Stephen Miller melted down again on live television over Trump's latest scandal as Newsom mocked him mercilessly.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
What else? Trump threatened retaliation for countries that tax or regulate U.S. tech companies. The leading license plate camera company has halted cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security over concern over how its investigations are used. Wow, that's some development too. Plus more news on the George Mason University front. Stay tuned.